Welcome to another episode of VM End to End, a show where we have a VM skeptic and a VM enthusiast come together to hash out all things VM related. Thanks for being here today, Brian.
Happy to be here. What's the topic for today?
Oh, you know what it is. I need to know about identity. I need to know about access. I want to know why I can't just SSH into everything, or if I can. What do you got for me, Brian?
Okay, so little quickie bit here, and then I'm going to bring a guest in because I don't know all the details. So one, you can just SSH in, right? Like it's a computer. You've got, SSH works with keys. So you've got, a key pair, and it kind of works as like when you have that token, you can get into any machine that the public key's on. And you can just manage those all yourself if you've got a system to do that. But it can get to be a lot and get quite complicated, especially as your organization gets larger. And we have a way to delegate the creation of those keys to Google's identity infrastructure. And that is why I wanted to bring in Emanuel, who's one of our colleagues, who focuses on identity and access management. Welcome, Emanuel.
Brian, thank you for that amazing introduction. How are you today, Carter?
Yeah, I'm doing well. A little confused, but I think Brian can tell you where my struggles lie.
So, Emanuel, what's the high level on identity and access management in Google Cloud?
Brian, that's a great question. So let's really go back and define what is IAM, right? So IAM stands for Identity and Access Management. And so what basically that means is that you can delegate or you can control who has access to what resources in your Google Cloud account.
Okay, so you can control who has resources or who has access to what resources. Who's setting that up?
Well, so at first you need to set up a domain. And so there's a person that's called the super admin. So the super admin goes into the admin console and they set up your domain. And so once they set up your domain, it automatically creates an organization for you. Now, this super admin is a role who can do anything within the admin portal. So they can manage users, they can create groups, they can set up multi-factor authentication. They can do all of these things via the admin portal.
So we've got this super admin and domain. And the thing I'm used to looking at the most is projects. Like, how do those connect?
Right. And so a domain one-to-one maps with an organization. And so if we think of projects sit under an organization. And so you can really think of an organization as the root node within your GCP account. And so with the root node, you can have things under them like projects and folders. And then you can assign resources to projects as well.
Oh, and then this hierarchical structure is what's used to give access to different areas, I take it.
Absolutely. There you go.
So then what about if I want a script or something to access services? I want a script to access part of like Google Cloud's resources for me. Like, what do I do then?
If you want an outside application or workload to access things within Google Cloud, you can use what's called a service account.
And what's that?
So you can really think of a service account as a special account that's granted to applications in order to be able to interact with APIs within Google Cloud. And so if we really want to kind of put this in context, let's look at a user account, right? So if I'm a user and I have access to Google Cloud, I would go via Chrome to the Google Cloud browser or website, and then I would log in. And so when I put in my username and password, I'm authenticated. After I'm authenticated, I get to inherit the permissions or roles that are attached to a group that I'm assigned to, right? But if I'm an application, I can't do that. I can't go and log into Google Chrome. So I would need a service account in order to interact with APIs and services within Google Cloud.
Got it. That makes sense. So we have these kind of organization units that give access to things. If I'm a user, I can get in one way. Maybe I can SSH in. If I'm programs, I can connect to other APIs via these service accounts. Are there any other ways that programs get access?
Yeah, so you have service accounts, and then you also have service account keys, right? So back in the day, in way distant past, right, we gave outside applications access to workloads or resources in Google Cloud using service account keys, right? But service account keys are problematic. One of the things that make service account keys really not a good choice if you're trying to really securely build resources in Google Cloud is because that they never end, right? They live on forever. And so service account keys, if they're leaked, can cause a really major issue. And so whoever has access to your service account keys, in theory, can impersonate a service account and get access to all the APIs and all the features that are attached to that service account. And then in addition to that, this causes a secrets management issue, right? So how do we manage these keys that are just floating around? So now you have to come up with a secrets management strategy in order to safeguard and provide some type of peace of mind around these service account keys.
I never actually thought about some of these downsides of service account keys, and I like to say like these things from the way distant past. I love that. What you just talked about though made me think of something. Like it seems like service accounts are used for resources within Google Cloud. What if I have some service or outside of Google Cloud that I want to authenticate into? Is there any way to let Google manage that?
Well, yeah, so we can do that. But let's say I'm using Terraform, right? So I want to build infrastructure within Google Cloud using a tool called Terraform, right? So I can do that. So long ago, in order for me to do that, in order for the outside application Terraform to interact with the resources in my Google Cloud account, I had to give it service account keys, right? And so I would set up Terraform, I would create a provider block, I would pass it my service account keys, and the service account keys would impersonate a service account within Google Cloud, right? So that worked. But now I can build my resources, but now I have to manage that specific key. So now we can use what's called short-lived credentials, and I don't have to worry about managing these service account keys. So now if I want to build infrastructure in Google Cloud using Terraform, I can use short-lived credentials in order to authenticate Terraform with Google Cloud.
I love how excited you were to tell me more about these short-lived tokens because they are that cool. They really are. So thank you. But all right. But now to the question before, is it possible to get this kind of security or access to external workloads?
Well, yeah. So we also have a feature that's called Workload Identity Federation. And so if you have workloads that are external or outside of Google Cloud that have their own identity provider, you can authenticate using these short-lived tokens. And so what happens is you have an application who gets credentials from its identity provider, and then those credentials are passed to Google's token service, and Google token service takes those credentials, creates an ephemeral short-lived token that it passes to the external application, and now the external application can access an impersonated service account within Google Cloud.
Got it. Okay, so we've got a lot of different kinds of access here, right? So we've got like users, service accounts, short-lived tokens, workload stuff. How do I decide, which ones of these to use in a given situation?
I mean, that's a great question. So it all depends, right? So if I'm a user and I just have a outside application that doesn't have an identity provider, let's say, once again, I'm using Terraform, right? I can use short-lived credentials to authenticate that outside application and impersonate a service account within Google Cloud. If I have a workload that has an identity provider, like let's say I'm using AWS for my identity provider, or I'm using on-premise Active Directory, or I'm using Azure Active Directory, or let's even say I'm using Okta. In those cases, it will be best to use Workload Identity Federation so you can dynamically generate keys and not have to worry about manually generating keys from like gcloud command line or one of the other methods.
And then all of this taps into IAM. That's that's awesome. So you've got a consistent way to look at it. That's super cool. So if somebody wants to dig in more on this, like where should they start?
In order to get more information about IAM, security best practices, Workload Identity Federation, short-lived credentials, you will go to cloud.google.com/IAM/docs.
Yeah. So to recap, and thank you so much, Emanuel, for coming in, because I had never heard of short-lived tokens. I'd never heard of Workload Identity Federation. And I never really thought about some of the downsides to even service accounts and the long-lived static keys. So to recap, would you say using IAM is a best practice maybe going forward?
Absolutely. I think if you're working in any large organization, setting up IAM using organizations is really the best way to go. Now, if you wanted to just play around with Google Cloud, you could sign up with just your Gmail account. But if you did that, that wouldn't give you access to all the benefits of organizations, right? So if you're at a large enterprise, organizations to invoke IAM on your Google Cloud account is the best way to go.
Wow. So that's about all. I learned so much today about workload federation, short-lived tokens, and more. Brian, thanks for bringing Emanuel on. I got to give you props.
No, thank you, Emanuel. This was great.
I appreciate you, Brian and Carter. Thank you guys for the opportunity.
Yes. If you're listening at home, leave a comment with something you learned. So I learned about short-lived tokens, workload federation. What's something that you learned about? Thank you. And that's all for this episode of VM End to End.